je vais faire ma présentation en anglais, mais s'il y a des questions en français après, je serai content de répondre en français aussi. So the title of my talk is called The Therapeutic Aesthetics of Forced Cinema. In a 2002 lecture given at the Auckland University Film and Media Studies Department, Maori filmmaker Barry Barclay announced the arrival of forced cinema, a feature-length cinema made by and for Indigenous peoples. At that point in time, 11 Indigenous features had been released worldwide. The canon of forced cinema has grown and diversified greatly since its relatively recent emergence. When Barclay first spoke of forced cinema, he identified a couple of organizational principles that brought together geographically, culturally, and stylistically diverse films. He inferred that forced cinema attested to Indigenous presence and existed outside the national orthodoxy of colonial nation states. For Barclay, forced cinema at its strongest fundamentally embodies core Indigenous values. And these are values that often clash with those of the colonizer. As he stated in his now seminal lecture, I quote, "If we as Maori look closely enough and through the right pair of spectacles, we will find examples at every turn of how the old principles have been reworked to give vitality and richness to the way we conceive, develop, manufacture, and present our films. It seems likely to me that some Indigenous film artists will be interested in shaping films that sit with confidence within the first, second, and third cinema framework. While not closing the door on that option, others may seek to rework the ancient core values to shape a growing Indigenous cinema outside the national orthodoxy." So in order for a film directed by an Indigenous filmmaker to truly embody the spirit of forced cinema, as Barclay conceives it, the film must revitalize the ancient core values of his or her Indigenous culture, values which exist outside and even challenge the national orthodoxy of the nation-state in which the film was made, thus distinguishing it from the first, second, and third invader cinemas, as Barclay refers to them. More so than blood, language, identity, or geography, Indigenous values are the essential characteristic of forced cinema. They form what Barclay refers to as the interiority of a forced cinema text. By thinking of values not as abstract ideals, but as collectively lived, and thus as having concrete effects in the world, the political importance of forced cinema starts to appear. Values structure the subjective forms that an event can take by establishing the ethical coordinates of action and delimiting the avenues of potential for abstraction. Put more simply, films that embody different values will create different collective subjectivities. The same power to condition subjectivity has been invested in Indigenous practices of storytelling. In her recent book, Dancing on Our Turtle's Back, Stories of Nishnabeg Recreation, Resurgence, and a New Emergence, Leanne Simpson shares Nishnabeg creation stories with the reader in order to transmit traditional values, such as gentleness, rebalancing, and love, that the stories, like the elders who kept them alive, embody. The embodiment of values also plays a key role in Mohawk scholar Taiki Alfred's influential writings on Indigenous liberation. Alfred's Peace, Power, and Righteousness, an Indigenous Manifesto, advances with clarity and force the idea that contemporary and future Native political leaders must come to embody traditional Indigenous values in order to radically change the relationship that First Nations have with the colonial nation-states that legislate over them. For Alfred, traditional Indigenous values carry a resurgent, decolonizing force capable of reconfiguring the social reality that is currently dictated in so many ways by neocolonialism's coercive powers. Alfred understands Indigenous values as the heart and soul of Indigenous nations, and he believes that they can, in his words, challenge the destructive and homogenizing force of Western liberalism and free market capitalism, while honoring the autonomy of individual conscience, non-coercive authority, and the deep interconnection between human beings and the other elements of creation." End quote. Values must be embodied, both individually and collectively, so that they can assume the transformative power imminent to them. Once embodied, they affirmatively challenge neocolonialism, not in the sense of being its negation or deconstruction, but in actively creating the conditions for an indigenous resurgence that models its own terms of subjectivity, that has the power to reconfigure its social and ecological life. The efficacy of this decolonizing resurgence is grounded in its therapeutic value. Thinkers such as Waziyata Win and Michael Yellowbird, in the For Indigenous Minds Only handbook, argue, and I quote, that undoing the effects of colonialism and working toward decolonization requires each of us to consciously consider to what degree we have been affected by not only the physical aspects of colonization, but also the psychological, mental, and spiritual aspects. Their emphasis on cultural, psychological, and spiritual well-being is reinforced by the work of First Nation scholar Diane Millian, who argues that, quote, colonized communities actively perform healing as liberatory practices, and that indigenous cultures may represent the only living models for different economic and social systems on the planet, ways of life that have the power to challenge capital cultures even when they are not pure or untouched by capitalism. These authors privilege the political stakes of subjectivity and the role of healing in crafting a liberatory constellation of collective subjectivity. And by acting on the field of subjectivity, the cinema engages a zone of potential over which neocolonial power claims its ultimate stake. Collective subjectivity is the last frontier of the colonial westward push. What Félix Guattari calls existential territories are as fragile and susceptible to total colonization and destruction as both First Nations and the natural world. In recognizing the fundamental antagonism between indigenous values and colonial capitalism, an antagonism maintained and revitalized by forced cinema, it becomes a somber necessity to declare, as Taiki Elfrid does, that the war is not over yet. Why this recourse to war, especially a war that cleaves along more or less ethnic lines in the era of multiculturalism? Some value systems are so utterly incompatible that to invoke peaceful coexistence in their moments of conflict is tantamount to espousing the extinction of one of the parties, the one with the more precarious value system under attack. Filmmaking embeds indigenous values that conflict with capital interests over ancient and unceded territories, both existential and environmental, and activates a collective refusal to live in accordance with the neocolonial ideology of aboriginalism, an ideology which dictates that indigenous peoples are simply one ethnic group amongst many, all supposedly equal under capital. The values immanent to forced cinema can be read as a therapeutic defense against the ongoing psychological and spiritual colonization, which risks the mental de-indigenization of the planet's indigenous peoples through complete integration into the logic of colonial capital. The political valence of storytelling and filmmaking, particularly in a time of war, lies in the fact that stories subject according to their immanent values. In the midst of a war that doubles as a war of subjectivity, indigenous arts offer alternative subject positions that defy the norms espoused by neocolonial ideology. The principle that allows for storytelling to decolonize subjectivity and contributes to a resurgent and defiant indigeneity is a concept called fabulation. Fabulation is a term mobilized by Henri Bergson and later taken up in a more overtly political usage by Gilles Deleuze in order to theorize the creatively productive force of fiction in post-colonial cinema. Writing on filmmakers such as Ousmane Sembène, Pierre Perrault, and Glaubert Roca, Deleuze uses the concept of fabulation to account for speech acts, like legending and storytelling, that cross the boundary separating private business from politics in the production of collective utterances. These fabulatory utterances call forth the lines of potential collective development that are imminent within the present social field. Deleuze's focus on the fabulatory speech act as an immediately collective utterance, productive of a revolutionary people to come, is particularly useful for analyzing post-colonial cinemas of orality. And thus it may seem like the perfect theory for coming to terms with the therapeutic force of forced cinema, given that it is a cinema that grows out of the world's most ancient oral traditions. Yet, in thinking about the most visceral moments that punctuate the forced cinema canon, there seems to be something else at work in its method of fabulatory subjectification beyond solely the oral tradition. Many of forced cinema's most poignant moments are literally speechless scenes filled with mourning and healing that often border on the magical and hallucinatory. These are the moments of another world, another decolonized world, being birthed out of the present colonial reality. A brief gloss of the canon springs some of the following examples to mind. Here we have some images from a 2013 film directed by Palawan filmmaker Kanakan Balantagos, who has also directed films under the name Oreas Salido in the Philippines. And this is a film called Palawan Fate, or the alternative title is Busong, Busong being the principle of instant karma held by the Palawan people. Here's an image of a Palawan shamanic ceremony taking place towards the end of the film, where one of the protagonists is being healed by a shamanic apprentice. You can see the use of a triangle mask here to distinguish the plane of reality that this ceremony is taking place on from other images that appear in the film leading up to this moment. And after that shamanic healing scene, we're transported into a alternate decolonized reality, a speculative future, where lesions that are covering this mythic character's skin are then able to be peeled off in a moment of seemingly supernatural healing. These are the concluding images to that film. Her brother peels the scars of colonial trauma off of her body. And the film ends with this image of healing. There is the 2010 film Boy, in which the childhood fantasies of a boy are expressed, and it's about his fantasies of his family overcoming a number of issues through magic and through imagination. Here's one of the more poignant moments in that film between father and son, and some of the childhood drawings that express his fantasies of overcoming family trauma. And being raised by a single father. There are the brooding Maori statues, angered over being stolen from their people and trapped in a Berlin museum in Barry Barclay's film Terua. And these statues literally speak in the film. and provoke the film's dramatic tension. The concluding scene of Sterling Harjo's 2009 film Barking Water, an independent Sundance-financed film. And in the final scene, an elderly woman protagonist must announce the death of her best friend to a family member, yet the death is too grave to be spoken of on film, so she ends up kissing this baby on the top of the head in a scene of mourning and healing. Some of you may know this film, The Business of Fancy Dancing, by Sherman Alexie. And here's an image of a non-diegetic insert where gay poet protagonist Seymour Polotkin performs a shawl dance in front of a blacked out background, queering Native American culture and Native Americanizing Seattle's gay culture in a gesture that embodies the contradictions that this character straddles. And I'll also share a couple more images, these ones from the 2009 film by Australian Aboriginal director Warwick Thornton. The film is called Samson and Delilah, a feature-length effort almost entirely devoid of dialogue, where in a bout, and this image is where in a bout of gasoline-induced hallucination, the protagonist, Samson, his girlfriend Delilah, appears to him as an angel who, in an unexpected, decolonizing détournement of the principle of terra nullius, whisks him off to a wide-open, seemingly unpopulated land of limitless possibility and mutual recovery. And this film ends with Samson in a wheelchair, recovering from his drug addiction and being nursed back to health by his girlfriend in a land that only they occupy. And these are some of the most significant indigenous films from the last few years, and particularly post-1990. So these non-discursive moments, pulled from some of these significant films, show that the values constitutive of forced cinema's interiority come to expression, and we could say convoke a people to come, in ways other than just the speech act. Instead, what these speculative images of healing are doing, rather than just orally convoking a new social condition, is broadening forced cinema's range of feeling to encompass an affective tenor of a possible world, a movement that parallels what Bergson calls mystic intuition. The mystic's intuition delves into a virgin plane of ecstatic experience never previously felt, which is then shared with humankind, bringing it closer to that affective state of rapture. Bergson offers an interesting historical example. Quote, William James used to say he had never experienced mystic states, but he added that if he heard of them spoken by a man who had experienced them, something within him echoed the call. Great mystics, by making their experiences reverberate in the world, lift the soul to another plane. Bergson goes on to write, and I quote, when the darkest depths of the soul are stirred, what rises to the surface and attains consciousness takes on there, if it be intense enough, the form of an image or an emotion. The image is often pure hallucination, just as the emotion may be meaningless agitation, but they both may express the fact that the disturbance is a systematic readjustment with a view to equilibrium on a higher level. The image then becomes symbolic of what is about to happen, and the emotion is a concentration of the soul awaiting transformation. As the ancient values eminent to forced cinema circulate in new socio-political contexts, they are activated and aroused in anticipation of a decolonized, healing future that could be gained if only indigenous values win the war of subjectivity production. Forced cinema is mystic in the sense that it projects divinatory images that are symbolic of a decolonial future which defies all market rationality. In addition to being a cinema of orality, forced cinema deploys a mystic intuition that affectively speculates on social constellations that defy, and in defying that attack, the neo-colonial foreclosure of possibilities that it brushes up against. According to Bergson, the method of the mystics consists in supposing possible what is actually impossible in a given society. And forced cinema, I argue, is no different. Forced cinema's mysticism, the non-discursive analog of Deleuze's concept of fabulation, makes echo a decolonized way of feeling which therapeutically broaches the trauma of colonialism and seeks to model subjectivity by beckoning a response. The mystic force of forced cinema allows for the flourishing of an indigenous interiority to double as an act of war and therapeutic technique. An act of war because these non-discursive mystic speculations infuse the film world with ancient values that refuse the depotentializing realism of colonial capital and confront its aggressive natural resource developments. An act of therapy because forced cinema reclaims the capacity of indigenous peoples to auto-subjectivate through filmmaking. Many forced cinema auteurs are then what we could come to call therapeutic activists, at once artists and storytellers, clinicians of an obfuscated neo-colonial reality, and speculators of a decolonial health. Thanks.
I would like to break the ice because we were talking yesterday. Again, I'm talking about this tour of Montreal, and we were thinking about a recent Romanian film, Beyond the Hills. How is it translated into English? Beyond the Hills, talking about exorcism, kind of mysticism in any case, and we came to the conclusion that I don't know. We were splitting because a part of the group thought it's maybe it is perceived in the Western world only as a kind of exotic thing, and the other part of the group said no. It's precisely through this element, it's really. It's a very remarkable thing. It's really interesting for the Western world to be confronted with this kind of thing. And now, of course, you can see the analogy I'm trying to draw with your thing. How is it perceived? I understand researchers within the decolonial tradition subjectifying through this kind of construction, through filmmaking and things like this, but how it is perceived from without? Is it only an exotic thing, or is it really trying to build a new kind of subjectivity as a parallel or in accordance to the mainstream?
Yeah, that's
this kind of mysticism where you were talking a lot.
Well, that's a good question. I haven't done the exhibition research per se to see exactly how it's being received by general publics. But this sort of cinema is exhibited in very particular sorts of circumstances, usually in festival situations, and usually at indigenous film festivals. So, for example, most of these films would never have a theatrical release outside of a film festival. So that attracts a certain type of audience who have an interest in these sorts of topics. In terms of the discourse on forced cinema, most of it hasn't really broached the questions of mysticism or healing or the supernatural yet. The most research that's on forced cinema tends to focus on more overtly political documentaries that will deal with, for example, how natural resource developments are affecting indigenous peoples, etc. So I bring this concept of the mystic intuition at the heart of forced cinema and at the heart of the values of forced cinema really as an open platform for thinking each film in its singularity. So in this presentation, I just wanted to give a general introduction to some overarching tendencies that I see in these films. But I think the next step, at least for me, and that I could propose to other forced cinema researchers, is to really take up the question of values at every singular juncture, and to go really film by film, to really ask what sort of cultural values are present in this film, through what sort of aesthetics are they articulated, and through what sort of effects are they deployed. And in order to ask those questions, there needs to be some sort of anthropological component that just doing more traditional film studies research doesn't immediately provide access to. Because in watching these sorts of films at a film festival, we don't immediately have the knowledge of what sort of ancestral values they may be tapping into and articulating. Although we do know some, in many ways it's still an open question, and the fourth cinema canon is really rapidly growing every year, thanks in large part to the Sundance Film Festival, which finances a lot of indigenous filmmaking, at least in the United States. There's really a growing body of work.
Why do you call it the fourth cinema?
Well,
For
those
who are studying cinema, it's very natural.
Yeah, so fourth cinema comes from this lecture given by the Maori filmmaker Barry Barclay as a response to the first, second, and third cinema models. First cinema referring to Hollywood cinema, second cinema referring to European art cinema, and third cinema, and this is where the concept of fourth cinema starts to become a bit more polemic as well, third cinema being revolutionary Marxist filmmaking in the Third World, as proposed by Solanas and Gittino in their essay Towards the Third Cinema, a post-colonial cinema. So it could be possible to think of indigenous cinema as having a lot of overlap with the third cinema model in particular, as they're both cinemas that are engaging with decolonizing efforts. But the difference between fourth cinema and third cinema is that fourth cinema is a reactivation of ancient indigenous values rather than a turn to Marxist praxis, liberatory praxis. So there also comes a point where, as researchers, we need to distinguish between films that are engaging in different political practices, as distinguished between the third and fourth cinema models, where a film could often be read as corresponding to either model. The other difference also, and I tried to articulate that a bit at the beginning of the presentation, is that the third cinema model is still a national cinema model, although it has an internationalist component, a Marxist internationalist component. It's still based on the liberation of a national cinema, whereas the fourth cinema model, as articulated by Barry Barclay and as it's been taken up by researchers, is an indigenous model. So it doesn't necessarily take the form of wanting to gain power of the nation state.
And when you say indigenous, it's talking only about indigenous in Canada or in the United States or
globally. And that's what's interesting about this concept as well, is that it unites different filmmaking practices from very different parts of the world. So under the fourth cinema, in the fourth cinema canon, we can include films by the Sami people in Norway, by various indigenous filmmakers here in Quebec and in Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, South America, and also the Philippines, elsewhere in Asia. So that also is partially what makes it a difficult and somewhat of a messy concept, because it doesn't correspond to any geographical specificity. In some ways, it's more of a posture vis-à-vis the nation state and dominant national cinemas.
Okay.
Yeah.
J'avais commencé à comprendre que le quatrième cinéma était disons une nouvelle tendance, avec les exemples que tu nous as montrés, mais avec la dernière question de Laura, j'ai élargi ma compréhension et je pense que ça peut inclure beaucoup de cinéma indigène. Il y a deux questions. La première, c'est est-ce que le quatrième cinéma est un cinéma documentaire, docu-réalité, qui s'apparente par exemple au cinéma vérité de Perrault, parce que tu as mentionné son nom, je crois, quand tu as parlé de Guattari. Et aussi, ça peut inclure aussi le cinéma fiction.
Mais c'est une bonne question. Et donc, pour répondre, non, le quatrième cinéma n'est pas du tout le documentaire, dans le sens que, dans lequel c'est donné par Barry Barclay. Il parle exclusivement des films fiction, des longs métrages qui... donc ça, c'est son focus. Mais quand même, il y a des chercheurs qui, évidemment, qui travaillent sur le quatrième cinéma et qui travaillent sur les documentaires aussi. Mais le focus est plus sur les longs métrages, des fictions. Et c'est aussi pour cette raison-là qu'on a ces moments de magie, de spéculation, on peut même dire du réalisme magie, des moments surnaturels dans ces films, parce que les codes esthétiques ne sont pas nécessairement liés au code du docudrame ou du docu-fiction. Ouais.
Mais quand tu réfères à des films, par exemple, avec des chamans, je comprends que c'est pas du documentaire, mais il y a quelque chose de cinéma vérité, en tout cas dans l'essence qu'on en a connu il y a une trentaine d'années avec l'Office national du film. Quand je pense à tous les films sur l'antipsychiatrie, il y en a eu beaucoup, ça ne rentrerait pas dans le quatrième cinéma. Si ça ne rentre pas là, ça rentrerait où?
On peut juste dire... mais ça dépend du film. Hein? Donc, on ne peut pas dire juste en général où ça peut tomber, mais film par film, on peut dire. Je ne suis pas nécessairement investi dans la création des frontières entre quatrième cinéma, long métrage, quatrième cinéma documentaire. Je pense qu'on peut tous discuter avec plein de méthodologies qui sont nous données par des écrivains autochtones, comme j'ai cité, comme Taiki Alfred, l'importance des valeurs. Je pense que ça a beaucoup d'importance pour même faire une analyse des documentaires, l'importance du storytelling de Leanne Simpson, les valeurs là-dedans, comment ça produit la subjectivité. Je pense qu'on peut même poser ces questions aux documentaires. Évidemment, les documentaires ont le pouvoir de nous assujettir comme les longs métrages. C'est juste dans ce discours où le terme quatrième cinéma a été inventé. C'était pas une cinéaste de long métrage qui a... Je pense que lui, peut-être, il a un intérêt à promouvoir ce genre de film sur une échelle globale. Mais la question que tu poses est vraiment intéressante parce que, oui, je pense que même ces longs métrages, ces fictions, peut-être on a besoin de créer une nouvelle catégorie pour mieux comprendre leur relation au réel. Parce que souvent, c'est des personnages qui sont des comédiens non professionnels, c'est des gens qui sont actuellement indigènes, donc ils viennent de communautés qui sont filmées. Donc c'est complètement un autre rapport aux fictions, un autre rapport au réel qu'on voit principalement dans le premier cinéma, souvent dans le deuxième cinéma. Parfois, ces techniques ont un lien plus semblable avec le troisième cinéma. C'est pour cette raison-là il y a souvent comme une mélange, une confusion entre ces deux deux écoles de cinéma. Ouais.
Juste pour terminer, l'image que... Oups, elle n'est plus là, mais il y avait quelqu'un d'handicapé dans l'autre image précédente. Et j'aimerais t'entendre un petit peu plus sur l'aspect thérapeutique. Dans le résumé, je pense que tu parlais en référence avec la perspective de Guattari à la Borde, mais l'image que tu nous as montrée tout à l'heure, je me demandais pour qui? Oui, pour qui c'est thérapeutique? Est-ce que c'est thérapeutique pour la personne qui est prise en image? Est-ce que c'est thérapeutique pour le public qui reçoit les images? Comment tu pourrais élaborer un petit peu sur l'aspect thérapeutique dont tu as parlé, s'il te plaît?
Oui, bonne question. De façon que je l'envisage, c'est que la création d'une relation thérapeutique est vraiment ça, c'est la création d'une relation entre cinéaste, entre audience, entre image, entre spectateur. Donc, je vois l'image comme zone d'affect et zone de relation entre tous ces différentes parties qui peuvent s'engager de leur propre manière. Et quand les images sont investies avec une intention thérapeutique, je pense que ça garde ouvert la possibilité de différents gens de rentrer là-dedans, de rentrer dans ces relations pour créer des communautés, des nations, des collectifs qui mettent ce genre d'intérêt en avant et qui sont tous assujettis par ce genre d'affect, en fait.
Juste une petite réflexion parce que tu as fait un choix très intéressant de films. C'est sûr, je ne les connais pas. C'est sûr que tu nous as attiré l'attention sur des œuvres qu'il faut voir. Mais en t'écoutant, j'ai trouvé que beaucoup de tes sujets, les thèmes dont tu discutes, s'appliquent beaucoup à un film canadien très connu, à Tanarjuat. Je pense que tu le connais, c'est sûr, Zachary Akunuk. Mais je me demande pourquoi tu ne l'as pas choisi. Parce que c'est comme... Parce que... c'est-à-dire, c'est une question de catégorie. Est-ce que ça veut dire que tu as choisi des choses qui définissent, disons, cette quatrième catégorie de cinéma? Parce que Zachary Akunuk, avec ses œuvres, c'est mainstream maintenant. Ça, c'est pas quelque chose que tu vois dans les petits festivals, c'est quelque chose mondialement connu. Alors, tu as choisi de ne pas en parler parce que c'est trop connu, c'est trop, je ne sais pas, c'est banalisé comme de toujours appliquer des thèmes à quelque chose de si connu, ou ça veut dire que c'est une omission volontaire, ou tu voulais mettre en évidence d'autres choses, parce que je pense que ça s'applique beaucoup, chamanisme, guérison, tout peut être mysticité, tout peut être vraiment, tu as tous les thèmes dans ce film-là, mais tu as choisi vraiment de ne pas en parler.
Mais oui, tu as raison, c'est un film beaucoup discuté, mais la raison principale pour laquelle j'ai voulu parler d'autres films est parce que j'ai voulu vraiment souligner le fait qu'il y a plein de moments non discursifs dans le quatrième cinéma. Et évidemment, Tanarjuat est un bon exemple du quatrième cinéma. C'est un film que j'aime bien. Mais dans ce film-là, c'est un film qui est une réinvigoration d'une ancienne histoire. Et même l'ouverture et fermeture de ce film, ça commence et ça finit par même mettre la tradition orale en avant. Comme ça commence avec un personnage qui dit « Ok, je vais vous raconter une histoire ». Donc c'est complètement dans cette tradition orale. Et évidemment, il y a plein de moments non discursifs dans ce film aussi, les scènes de course en particulier. Mais oui, c'est juste qu'il y a plein d'autres films qui ne sont pas vraiment discutés, que des gens connaissent beaucoup moins. Et j'ai voulu vraiment souligner les films qui ont moins d'accent sur l'oral pour essayer de penser comment les valeurs peuvent être transportées dans un film sans les énoncer verbalement.